I hope you've had a great break and that you're comfortable and ready for the next session now, because it's my great pleasure to introduce our keynote, Jenny Garrett, who's going to be talking about, are you ready to disrupt the future? So Jenny Garrett, OBE, is an award-winning career coach and leadership trainer with almost 2 decades running a global business. She's got an Amazon bestseller, Rocking Your Role, on the taboo subject of female breadwinners, and she coaches and takes speaking engagements all over the world, including TEDx and in the UK media. Not only that, she also gives back through her social enterprise, Rocking Your Teens. Advance HE, and before that, the Leadership Foundation, alongside generations of female leaders across our programs, have been really fortunate to have had Jenny's support right from the beginnings of Aurora. And so we're really delighted to have her with us here today. So with that, Jenny, over to you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I've just noticed I've got a very messy background, but I'm going to take that as me being really authentic and in the moment with you all, and show the imperfections of working life. It's really great to be here. I think the greatest thing is to think 10 years of Aurora and to remember that I was part of the very, very first cohort, and look how it's grown and developed, and absolutely amazing to see this wonderful group of women growing from strength to strength. So I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes and just share some of my thoughts and ideas with you, and then give you the opportunity to discuss some of them and come up with some actions. It's great to be inspired, but for me, it's always about what are the practical, tangible actions that you're going to take away. So I'm hoping that you will take some away from today. This is me many decades ago, a little girl who dreamed of the future. And if you can take yourself back to being perhaps that sort of age and dreaming of what it would be like, what life would be like now, I wonder what you imagined might happen, what might actually take place. Well, I imagined definitely by being at these advanced years, there'd at least be flying cars like we saw on Back to the Future. It would be ideal right now because the traffic is awful everywhere I go. There's roadworks everywhere I go, and there are penalties for going along the wrong journey, wrong road all the time, particularly in London. And so it would be amazing if this was in place, but I haven't seen any flying cars where I live as yet, sadly. I also thought if there weren't flying cars, perhaps there would be teleportation. I watched Star Trek with my uncles, I remember. And imagine if we wanted to travel to Australia, instead of taking a 17-hour flight, if it was possible for us to be transported there in a moment, and also to be transported back in a moment. I thought that this would be the case, and I still am dreaming of and wishing for teleportation. But it's, it hasn't happened for us yet. And the final thing that I was sure would have happened was that we would be able to have all of our meals in a single pill. We'd wake up in the morning, get all the nutrition, everything we wanted, all in this single pill, be able to get on with our day. But again, this hasn't been realized. In truth, I'm pretty pleased that it hasn't, as it sounds a lot less enjoyable than sitting and having a meal with friends and enjoying all of those flavors and the aromas as well. Apparently science is nowhere near creating meals in pills because it's incredibly difficult to pack all of the calorific and nutrient needs into a single capsule. So that's not going to happen anytime soon, I don't think. We actually are close to having flying cars, and according to the data, by 2025, flying cars may actually be in our worlds. They've been granted permission in the US. And while human teleportation doesn't exist, actually atoms have been teleported, it's been reported, but not human beings. So why am I sharing this? Well, as I said, happy birthday to Aurora. We couldn't have predicted 10 years ago that we would be here today with a cohort of a group, a community, an alumni of amazing women. And we cannot predict exactly where we'll be in 10 years' time, unfortunately. All we can do is be ready for the many different possible futures that might unfold for us. And I think that's really exciting and interesting for us to think about, that actually there is no one inevitable future, that there may be many different futures that unfold. And it's about equipping ourselves to be able to thrive in those situations. And if I should be so bold, to think about how we can shape them. Someone said, I was listening in the previous session, there are so many of us. Where is our voice, and how can we use that voice to shape the workplace, to be more creative instead of fitting in, perhaps creating an environment where more of us can thrive. So when I talk about the future of work, I really like this definition of what we're talking about, because sometimes when we think about what is this world we want to disrupt, we haven't thought about what exactly it looks like. So, I'm talking about how we work, who the workers are, what the workplace looks like, and the fact that that's going to evolve in the future, and that we are actors within it. We can take action within that. We will be influenced, we know, by technology, by socio-economic factors, by politics, and by demographic changes, but we are actors within it. I think that's really helpful for us to be considering. And when we think about this, it's really easy to sometimes overemphasize the role of technology, and underestimate how technology fits into the social fabric of how we do things. And I think that's where leaders come in. It's not just about the technology, it's how we bring technology in, it's how we make technology work for us, how much power and influence we give that technology as well. And these are things that we have to consider, particularly as women, and also the intersection of our identities as women. In senior roles, in education, we know that we do not have enough women. When we start to look at the intersection of identities, that even becomes more stark. That disparity becomes more stark. And potentially, if we don't decide to drive what the future looks like and shape what the future looks like, it could become even worse for us. What we know is that technology has created a gig economy, where people have quite insecure roles, often short-term, temporary contract work. That's existed in higher education for a long time, with people on one-year contracts, for example. That it could be exasperated. And what we know is that women and those from minority backgrounds are often in more of that insecure employment. So we could end up being in a group of people who are really disadvantaged by what the future brings for us. That will be really difficult. In addition, if we're not in positions of leadership, the technology could miss out on supporting us. I'm sure you've read so much about AI and how it can discriminate against women, but I can give you an example of the fact that Amazon used AI for its recruitment processes to sift through CVs, for example, and it used old data to decide on what the future should look like. And of course, because women hadn't got those senior roles in the past and hadn't been recruited at the same levels of men in the past, when it was predicting who would be successful in the organization and the CVs that should go forward, it was actually sharing that, sifting out more women than men. If we are not in that decision-making space, if we're not in those rooms, all of the issues that have existed in the past will just happen all over again in 10 years' time. And we also know from the challenges that we've had with COVID and many people still working at home some of the time, that this reinforces the double burden of paid work and unpaid work that many women experience as well. Stereotypes still exist in our society, and they will continue to exist if we don't start to find out where those blind spots are, challenge those stereotypes, really start to consider how we can in the future impact how people think, behave, their mindsets, their attitudes, and really harness the power of difference and the power of the way we do things. I heard someone in the conversations you were having earlier, I believe, talk about job share. And what I heard about that, and what I think is really important to remember, is the future is already happening. The future is already happening. The future is just not happening consistently. And so it's really important for us to notice and see the amazing bits of great practice, of exciting practice, where people are able to shape their roles, shape their culture, shape their organizations, where they work for women, and think about how we can cascade that, how we can make that more common, how we can make that useful for everyone. I think in the future that it's very important for us to be thinking about cultural difference as well, and think about how we harness that. Increasingly, the global divides are disappearing, aren't they, with technology? You could be in India, Africa, America, Sweden, all in one day really easily, without teleportation, with the power of Zoom or any other online system. But actually, what does that mean? How do we harness the potential of people? It's not just about being able to connect with them. It's about how we are able to leverage that difference and make it work for everyone, and how you do that in a virtual world. So there are a lot of challenges for us as women, but also a lot of opportunities. And I think these are the things that we need to think about. I think we need to think about how we build trust, our own leadership style, how we communicate, how we think, our own well-being, and the communities we build. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what I mean by those things. I think trust is going to be vital in the future. If we think about the workplace interactions, increasingly they are virtual, increasingly they are distant from other people. And that means that we need to build trust differently. I coached some people who, during lockdown, who had started their job during lockdown, and they often misunderstood their line managers, sometimes felt they were hostile. When they met them in face-to-face, they didn't feel like that. Often questioned the culture of the organization that they were part of, because they couldn't feel it, they couldn't sense it, they couldn't experience it in the same way that you do when you walk into a building. So there's something really important about how we start to build trust, and how we recognize that building trust is a key element of how we will lead. And I think it also is about being visible and accountable as well, and making sure that your interests and the interests of those who follow you, of those who work for you, are in alignment. You need to be seen. People need to know who you are, what you stand for, and what you're about. And you need to show up in a transparent way, even more than you have ever had to before, because of the way the world is changing. I also think because we've started to use technology in many ways that feel like that we are being watched and observed and monitored, and data is so important, data is key, that the trust needed with leaders is to say, actually, you're not just going to make decisions based on that data, you're also going to make decisions based on the human element that exists because if we only trust the data, then actually people and their interpretation of the data might not be trusted, and they will feel that they are actually at the whim of algorithms. So understanding that data challenge can be two ways, and how you build that trust around that, and what's the reason for monitoring? Why are we doing it? We know a lot of lectures are recorded now. Why do we record our lectures? Are we recording them for the student? Are we recording them for the lecturer? Are we recording them for the institution? Why are we doing this? And so everyone's really clear, and there's no doubt about the aims, the objectives. There is a huge danger of human oversight, that we forget the humanity in our work, and we forget the human interactions, and we forget the input of humans, which is more able to understand those complex and nuanced situations. So the building trust is so key, and putting safeguards around so that we don't decide that technology or data is more important than human beings, and we don't give too much weight in the wrong direction as well. In terms of leadership, with potentially reduced physical interactions, we start to question, what is the role of leadership? Potentially you could set up a string of emails or AI interactions that could text your colleagues to motivate them, nudge them into doing the next job, or give them a pat on the back to do that they're doing a great job. So what do we need leaders for? I think that when I consider it, I think something around servant leadership is really important. How can I serve you to enable you to do the best work you can? And I think that will be the type of leadership that we'll be considering in the future. How do we maintain ethics in the way that we do things, and how can we be adaptive as well? So how can we keep changing, respond to change, and bring people with us? Those are the areas where I think you will have to focus on your leadership. And as I speak, perhaps right now you're thinking, where do I fit in? Am I already a servant leader? Is ethics at the top of my agenda? Is adaptive leadership that you covered on Aurora, is that something that I am living, embodying? And how can I drill down into that a bit more to make sure that I'm able to respond to what the future brings, or shape what the future brings, which I think is much more important to do. How you frame requests, how you provide feedback, all of these things are going to be key, because they'll be open to misinterpretation and misinterpretation. And so communication is important. I don't know how many of you now will produce a video of yourself to speak to your colleagues, how many times you're recorded on your Zoom calls or your Teams calls, how much you think about the communication that you are giving. But the way we communicate, I think is going to be so important. I've talked about visibility, but actually a charismatic video message might be the way you lead in the future. So it's perhaps going to feel a little bit more like being a politician, actually being in that place, conveying the right words and communication that brings everyone along with you. And if you're thinking about it being one way without that two-way interaction that you receive when you're in a room with someone, you have to be thinking about every word much more carefully, the interpretation of your words very carefully, how you come across, even what you're wearing, all very carefully, so that's not misinterpreted, because you often just get one shot then to deliver that communication. So if you're currently not comfortable with public speaking, being visible, video messages, podcasts, that sort of thing, I think work on it, and also think about those short communications as well. Maybe it's a WhatsApp message, or even your emails. In the absence of all of the other cues, what are they telling people? And I think one of the most important things is a bit of slow thinking. You're all busy. we're all in a rush. We all have competing priorities, but actually slowing down, thinking about the implications. Yes, so much of what we do can disappear and be done very quickly by machines, but actually that slow thinking, that deliberation might help us with some of the biggest challenges we have in society. And some of that fast thinking might just reinforce what we've always had. I know that everyone here wants something different. And that does require us to take steps back, to sit in our action learning sets, to meet with groups of people and really think about some of those most challenging issues rather than getting stuck in with the day-to-day. We can do the busy work day in and day out, but actually the slow thinking allows us to do the important work. And actually the busy work we can leave to computers in the future. And, almost my final thought is this idea of looking after ourselves. I know there will be a session on resilience later. This is going to become, I think, increasingly important with distributed teams of people, people working from home or from coffee shops or wherever, students engaging from wherever they are. How do we ensure well-being? And how do we ensure our own well-being as well? If we're managing and leading teams, how do we build self-confidence, self-regulation? How do we build competence when we're not in the room and we don't overhear everything someone says? We can't do that immediate course correction, and we might not even be able to give them that immediate validation. So how do we build resilience in our teams? How do we build resilience in ourselves in the absence of feedback all of the time? And how do we build resilience in our systems as well to help us really keep going? So my last thought for you is about building community. You are in community today. Thousands of you have been through Aurora, whether it's your cohort or the wider group. You have an amazing community of people who actually have strong ideas, lived experience of what it is to work in higher education. And I'm sure if you choose not to be limited by what has happened previously and what is currently, can envisage an amazing future that we can shape based on the fact that, remember, the future is already happening. We just need to make it happen in a larger way that makes sure that everyone wins and no one has to lose. So I hope that's giving you a little bit of food for thought. I would love you to go into breakout rooms now. I think you're going to have about 15 minutes. And I'd like you to think, from what I've said, what are the skills that you personally need to develop to shape the future that we all deserve? Do you need to develop skills around building trust? Do you need to think more about your own leadership approach? Do you need to step into being a more visible communicator? Do you need to develop the ability to think slowly and not get caught up in that day-to-day? Or is it about your own resilience? Or finally, do you have to work hard on networking and building that community of people who can be thought leaders and really advocate for change? So you're going to go into your breakout rooms. I'd love you to have a chat about that and anything else that I've said that has made you think. And there's also going to be a Slido question. It's going to be posted as a Slido question. And I'd love you to just actually commit and put the skills you personally want to develop into Slido. And we'll look at it as a word cloud when you come out of those rooms. I look forward to seeing you after your breakout rooms. See you soon. Hoping everyone Welcome back, everyone. I popped into a few rooms and heard some really interesting discussions. It would be great if we could put the Slido up and see what came up in terms of your actions. Yes, so this concept of slow thinking seems to have struck a chord with many of you, and how you're able to do that in your very busy working lives, where actually everything is in a hurry. We're trying to do a lot of work all of the time. And in many ways, it's surprising, because if you think about your institutions, you're built on critical thinking and depth of thought, and helping your students to have that same depth of thought. But actually, what happens is a lot of the situational aspects go against that. So tight deadlines, lots of changes, having to respond to those. And what I was saying to one of the groups that I went into was the fact that often women are called on in those reactive moments. Oh, a student needs some support in an emergency, a colleague is having a tough time, something's changed, can you step in and help out? Because if we think stereotypically, which is not always the case, we are supposed to be supportive and collegiate, we're called on more than others to move into the fast thinking space. And often things like multitasking and that sort of thing do not help. How can we nurture more slow thinking? I think sometimes, for me personally, it's getting into projects or activities that require it. If I have to write an article, if I'm writing a book, if I'm involved in something that's new to me, I have to slow down my thinking. I don't go to the usual places, the instant places. I don't know the answers, and it requires me to do that. The more I do it, the more that becomes a habit for me, and I can do it more in other spaces. So you might need to look out for opportunities to do so, or you might need to carve out space to do so. And I know in busy lives, that's really challenging. But one thing I know is if I work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, there would still be more work. So we have to decide where we put our boundaries. What seems to be coming up next is confidence and networking. They seem to be the two next important areas. And it's interesting to think about what sort of network you want to develop. I think it's not just about networking. I think it's about leveraging your network. I think this is key. How do you come together? How do you build community, advocacy, and voice? So I think you already have a network. You have a network of thousands of women in Aurora. You have a network within your institutions, maybe within your profession. You have them. How do you leverage them? And I think that's for you to be considering. Perhaps there is more you can do to show the pockets of great practice that are currently happening that could illuminate what the future looks like. Perhaps you could ensure that you get into positions in the future so you can influence what the future looks like, and use your network to do that. And confidence is a really interesting thing that I've often and constantly thought about. You may have heard me say previously, if you've heard me speak before, confidence comes after action, not before. So sometimes we are waiting to feel confident in 10 years' time. The idea is to take action that builds your confidence now, so that in 10 years' time, you're already confident. So the idea is taking action, taking brave steps, stepping out of your comfort zone. These are the things that help you. So hopefully I've started to help you think about some of the smaller actions that you can take. There's a lot around the ideas you have, but I'd like you to drill down a little bit and think, what's the specific action I'm going to take to develop my slow thinking, to develop or leverage my network, to build my confidence, my visibility, and my resilience. Thank you all so much for your time today. It's been really fantastic to see you all. Happy anniversary, happy birthday, Aurora. And I look forward to coming back in 10 years' time and celebrating with you again then. Do feel free to stay in touch. It would be lovely to keep connected with you all, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Jenny, for such a thought-provoking, inspiring keynote. I think we all really appreciated that. And so I just want to invite people again to unmute and give Jenny a really lovely round of applause. Thank you. And that part you said at the end about confidence coming from action and not before action is something I'm going to take away and share as much as I can. I think that's so important. So that concludes our morning sessions, and now we're all going to get a very well-deserved break for lunch. So again, please stretch, take a walk, look out the window, have a little reflect on what's happened so far, and don't forget to eat as well. And give yourself the gift of that time if you can. We are back at 2 o'clock, but at 2 o'clock we are going into our parallel workshops. So you've probably already decided whether you're going to Visible Credibility with Suzanne O'Brien, Career Development with Joe Cutler, or Resilience with Claire Burgess. And you should already have the link, but I think Shanice is going to pop those in the chat for you as well. And so we hope you've enjoyed the morning, and we will see you back in the workshops at 2 o'clock this afternoon.